fatherlessness, sickness, hopelessness, and despair. A dire situation that was changed by a 15-year-old girl who showed an ounce of compassion. On today's episode, we get to talk to my friend Richmond and hear all about his journey to survival. This is the Mike Santiago Show presented by Compassion International, and we are going to jump right into today's episode. Welcome back. Hey, this next segment is brought to you by Compassion International. Connect your church with the life-giving ministry of Compassion by visiting compassion.com/Mike. That's compassion.com/Mike.
My brother Mike.
How are you?
I am well, thank you. How are you doing?
Doing great. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you perfectly. Do you hear me well?
I hear you perfectly as well. Thanks so much for taking some time to sit down today. What time is it where you were at?
Well, it's about 4 p.m. East African time.
Okay. What part of East Africa are you in?
Uganda.
Okay. That's great. I was just in Pemba, and I was in Zanzibar, and my grandfather actually grew up. When I was growing up, he was a missionary in Africa for 50 years. So he spent his time in Zambia, Equatorial Guinea for a little bit. And so, but I was literally I was just in it over there. We went on the Serengeti and we did safari there in East Africa, but mostly missions work with the Assemblies of God there on the island of Pemba, which is, really a really beautiful place. And it was a lot of fun. So that's very cool. Very, very cool.
Africa is very beautiful.
It's amazing. It really is. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, there's one main thing on my heart, which is really the current state of children in Uganda and the 26 countries that Compassion International works through. So a little bit about me. I spent many days out of school on the street. But because of Compassion International, I was able to get taken off the street and given a chance at life, a fighting chance at life. And so the fact that I'm doing what I'm doing right now, I just cannot forget where I came from and how one act changed my life. And so I like to talk about how, we are really in a place where we can always do this one act, and it doesn't have to look the same for everyone. But it's just because people have stopped paying attention. People are just living their lives, the whole mundane routine. It's just like, hey, but if you stop, and this is how my wife puts it. It's like, look, when she looks around, we're all walking through life looking down, but there is a lot that you see when you look up, and that's really where my heart is. And I like to say to people, look, my sponsor, who was a 15-year-old girl called Heather, decided to live simply so I could simply live. And guess what? That is a choice that a 15-year-old can make. How much does a 15-year-old have? But if a 15-year-old can make that decision and it results into a life being saved, and guess what? It's not just my life that was spared. It's my potential that is now being unleashed to make a significant contribution into my nation. So I am currently the senior pastor of the very church that rescued me as a boy on the street. I am currently the founder and president of Pastors Discipleship Network, which is a ministry that's serving 8,000 pastors. This is 8,000 churches across 4 East African countries. The average size church is 120 members. That's 960,000 church members that are growing deeply in the Word and spreading themselves out throughout East Africa, doing the work of God, simply because a life was spared by one act. And so I think that if people just wake up that actually God can never ask us to do anything that we cannot do. We have everything we need to do His will in the season that He's called us to do. And so I really like that, but I'm very big on training and equipping pastors, because I believe, and this is something Santiago, that I believe with all my heart that what was the mission field is now becoming the mission force. And Africa, which was seen as, look, this dark continent, this dark, bottomless pit. You throw resources, nothing ever comes up. People never change. That relegated, despite its place, is turning around. And I think it's becoming very pivotal in the conversation of the church in the next 100 years. And so I'm working very hard to see that pastors are trained and equipped, but Africa begins to fashion itself differently and to see itself differently so that we can develop missionaries that have the capacity to go into the world and make a difference. And so I'm just not just content with just cheap Christianity where, we just say, hey, you guys are now born again. It's our time to send missionaries to the world and so go. No, man. Those guys need to be able to weather the storms that have so far pulled down the West. They've got to be able to intellectually make a case, as well as they shouldn't be able to get off their knees. They need to be prayerful. They need to be mentally smart. They need to be grounded in the word. But the church in Africa needs to have the financial capacity to be able to send. And so these things are the big pieces that I'm working on right now with these 8,000 churches. And we are growing at about 11% annually. So there is this, it's not an organized, this is actually a movement. And so we're really excited about what God's doing here.
Wow. And take me back to your childhood and take me back to growing up in the church that rescued you. What are some of the key components to that church? What did they do well that brought you into the place that you are in now? What an incredible story. So take me into your childhood. What was that like? And how can someone here in America, maybe listening or watching, partner with Compassion to ensure that more of this happens?
Right. So I'll just share with you my story. For those that are listening and connecting with us, my name is Richmond Wandera. I come from a country called Uganda. I come from a big family of 6 kids. 2 parents, obviously, 6 kids. I was the third one of the 6 kids. And so I was born in an average home where my father worked hard. He was a lawyer. My mother never got a chance to go to school, but she knew well to stay home, take care of us when my father went out to work and provide for us. But when I was 8 years old, my father was killed and everything changed.
Wow.
I just cannot forget that knock on the door from our landlord that just kind of shoved us out of our house. And we ended up in the worst slum in Uganda, a slum called Naguru. I mean, when you mention the name Naguru, I mean, you could just see and feel how that name impacts people. It was called the Forgotten Community.
Wow.
I mean, just you talk about 3 square miles of the dense, in the undescribable place. But that's where we ended up. And by the time I was 9 years old, I was out of school. My mother, her health was bad, and so we were unable to get any provision from her. So she stayed home while we as kids went out to try to survive. And so out of school, hungry, fatherless, motherless, hopeless. By the time I was 10 years old, I had suffered from malaria over 10 times.
Wow.
I can tell you that for me to be on this show, for me to be here today, Mike, it's a total miracle. Wow. That's why I live my life very, very, very purposefully. And so, Mike, by the time I was 10 years old, I just knew my life was going to end like many other kids, but I ended up surviving. By the time I was 11 years old, my mother had found her way into one of the churches, and she was not a Christian, but there was help there. And so that's how come I got plugged into Compassion. I was connected to a 15-year-old girl. A 15-year-old girl sponsored me.
Wow.
And this one decision just began to change my world. I can remember this as clear as day. It's just like it happened yesterday. Hearing the words of Pastor Peter, who was the pastor of the local church that Compassion partnered with. And he said to me, Richmond, You can now go back to school. You can now go back to school. Man, oof. And then I remember him saying, look, you can come here. You see those swings over there, those merry-go-rounds? How about it? You can be a child again. And then food was provided for me. And this 15-year-old, man, I go to learn about this later on. She took a babysitting job. So from that, she took off $38 a month and sent that to Compassion, and Compassion sent it to the local church, and the local church made it available for me. And I can tell you, my whole world changed. Listen to me, Mike. By the time I was 14, I heard the gospel. Now, I had heard it several times at the program, but it was such a new message. I didn't know what was being said. But at 14, I understood. And at 14, I became the first Christian in my home.
Wow.
By the time I was 16 years old, all five of my siblings had made the same decision at the Compassion Project. This 15-year-old was just changing my life and changing my family forever. And then when I was 19, my mother, she made a decision to come to Christ. And then just the entire environment. I mean, you enter, the atmosphere in the house was different. My mom ended up forgiving the man who killed my father and the other man who was responsible for taking everything from us that my mom had retained after my father's passing. And she forgave both of them and actually took care of one of them in hospital. This is why I'm very passionate about faith. It's because there is no book my mother would ever read to bring her to that place of forgiveness. But I know that in Romans it says that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation.
Yeah.
It just changed. It changed my mother. And so by the time I was 24, I was invited to become associate pastor of the very church that hosted the Compassion Project that rescued me. Guess what, Mike? Today I am the senior pastor of the church.
Let's face it, church fundraising is hard, and 90% of U.S. wealth is tied up in non-cash assets. This means churches only accepting cash donations are missing massive giving potential, and Overflow is here to help. Overflow is an online software that empowers donors to give crypto and stock donations to churches and nonprofits within minutes. The average donation to churches and nonprofits is around $128, but the average donation through Overflow is $10,000. Your donors want to give stock and crypto because it's the most tax efficient way to give. Why? Because there's no capital gains tax. So churches get the full donation and donors get the full tax deduction. As a result, churches have seen up to 32 times a return on their investment with Overflow. Let's unlock unprecedented generosity together. Visit overflow.co/Mike. That's overflow.co/Mike.
That is an incredible testimony, and the power of one person's decision who is in a different continent and just someone that is doing relatively small amount for someone babysitting all month long. A portion of her income goes to you, and then it changes the trajectory of your entire family. And there's going to be a long line in heaven for that young girl who was babysitting, thanking her. I mean, how many people do you think have come to Christ and are connected to the kingdom because of that one girl's investment? It has to be in the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people by now.
Right.
It has led you to start a movement to disciple leaders and to disciple pastors. Tell us just a little bit more about that. What kind of training are you providing? How many churches are you influencing? And what are some of the things that you're teaching now that you are in the position that you are in?
Later on, I got a chance to do a master's degree from Moody Bible Institute. I did a master's degree in Spiritual Formation and Discipleship. And a few years in, I realized that training pastors in theology without the component of leadership still did not move the pin very far. And so I wanted to really understand leadership, not just the practice of leadership, but the philosophy of leadership. And so I ended up doing a Ph.D. in philosophy of leadership from Lancaster Bible College and Capital Seminary. And so with these skills and this knowledge that had been entrusted to me, I wrestled a lot with the idea that to whom much is given, much is required.
Right.
And so I founded the Pastors Discipleship Network, which is essentially a very large platform for pastors who have no training to come and learn. And so I developed 6 books, which one of them, the pastors would go through these 6 books in a period of 2 years. But the first book is what we call Seminary Light, or a book on theology. And this book on theology enables pastors to get introduced to foundational courses in theology. The second book that we go through is on preaching, and essentially, how do you communicate truth powerfully and clearly? And then the third book that the pastors go through is leadership. How do you lead well? And the other book that we talk about is on discipleship. How do you mature people? The other book that we go through is a book on family. It doesn't matter how successful a minister is. If his family is falling apart, it's of no heavenly good. Then the other thing that we talk about is on entrepreneurship. Now, my first degree is in business and gave me a little bit of that background. So because most pastors in Africa are bivocational, and don't draw a salary from their churches, there is just sort of an acute need for pastors to understand business and money and accountability and budgeting and things like that. So we train pastors in that as well. Then we also have a course in apologetics. And then lastly, we have a course in church planting. And so these are the courses that we deliver over a period of 2 years. And I can tell you, Mike, these pastors have just been drawn to this. In 12 years, we are now excess of 8,000. And those are people who have gone through and are certified. But in terms of reach, we are so in excess of 15,000 now in terms of pastors that we are touching.
Wow. Take me to a local city there in Uganda. Take me to a bivocational pastor. What does their other job look like? What are you training them to do? How are they providing for their family practically? Because I think sometimes we forget that in other parts of the world, it's very standard for a pastor to simply lead the flock, but have a vocation outside of the church. And so maybe it will help some of our listeners today shift their paradigm as to what full-time ministry really means. So take us to like a local city. What does a job look like for a local pastor, and what are you training them to do so that they could do the ministry and provide for their family financially?
So one thing to help our listeners really walk in the footsteps of a pastor is first to see that the pastor does not view pastoring as a job. So 98% of pastors in Uganda have no contract. Okay, it's a full-time calling with no contract. And the reason churches don't tie themselves to the contract is first, it's not the practice, but 2, a contract will require then the conversation of salary. And most churches, where they are, they won't commit to a salary. Now, the offering that is given at church sometimes is brought in kind. So someone will bring a bunch of green plantain. Someone will bring bananas. Someone will bring something, and put that together. The pastor has something to eat. The pastor has something for their children. The pastor can sell some things off so that the kid can go to school. But there is no contract.
Right.
The other reason that there is no contract is there is not enough paper to describe the amount of expectation that will be levied on the pastor. So the pastor is not just the person who preaches and teaches and leads the team and casts vision and provides counseling. The pastor is out doing justice. The pastor is called up when there is a kidnap case. The pastor is called up when there is conflict. The pastor is called up when there is a dispute on land. It's just endless. Like, to be a pastor, it's almost like the picture of the opposite of a witch doctor. So a witch doctor in Uganda, before people become Christians, they will practice witchcraft, or they'll practice voodoo, or they'll practice some form of African traditional practice where when you go to a witch doctor, you tell him all about who is attacking you, your enemies, your jobs, your dreams, and then they'll ask you to sow something. So that mindset is transferred to this man of God.
Wow.
And so the pastor literally has to do all these things. And so that the amount of expectation that Africa would have of their pastor would be like the expectations that the pastor in the West would have of their pastor times 100.
Wow.
Okay. So and then there is no salary except utilizing what people bring for offering. So the pastor has then to figure out, how do I utilize Monday to Friday so that my family is taken care of? And so in one case, Pastor Okumo, this is a guy who gets up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and he goes off to the market where large trucks that are bringing mangoes from the countryside would park. And so from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., he is sorting quality mangoes, and he's putting those aside and putting those in bales or in bags. And as he is done, he has to then move those bales to the main market place by about 7 a.m. so that now he begins to sell. Oftentimes his wife would be there to support him, or his children, if they're old enough, they'll join in there. And so they would sell through to around maybe 3 or 4 p.m. But then he has to rush home quickly, take a shower, dress a bit differently, and run to church, because there's mostly evening services almost every day of the week. He has to pray for people. He has to counsel people. He has to do all that. And then just kind of keep going that round and round. And so to say that many pastors in Uganda are burnt out is so accurate, because it's just it just never ends. There's a pastor who came to PDN and said, look, I'm so burnt out. 15 years, I've never missed a Sunday preaching.
Wow.
15 years, I've never missed a midweek service, and I'm done. And so what we try to do at PDN is, when one of the courses, which is where we teach on family, we say to the pastor that you can't run yourself into the ground. Your wife needs you. Your children shouldn't hate the church. And so we bring this as practical as possible, using examples like Jesus saying, come away with me to the other side so we can rest a bit. And so through things like that, very practical stories, pastors are able to have some aha moments like, wow, okay, now I see what I've been doing wrong, and no more. From today, now that I know a better way, I will take the better way. So it's hard work for pastors. But I can also say this, Mike, that pastors do it willingly. It's amazing how I have seen pastors worship in the midst of great need and great scarcity. And it's not like they're making all this money. In the end of a week, they'll probably make $2 or $3. It's not like there is all this profit margin. But he might wear a torn shirt or this, but when they jump up and start praising and worshiping, Mike, it's the most beautiful sight that you can see. Energy like you've not seen. And then I think that there is something there about worshiping God in the midst of difficulty. I know that it's one thing to worship God when things are going well, when there is insurance paid and there is all these things that are making a person feel secure. So someone can lift up worship easily. But in days like this, when things are very, very tough, when following the lockdown, most pastors lost their sources of income, and yet they can still lift up their hands and worship. Mike, there is something there that I think Africa can really teach the world about worshiping God in a hard place or from a hard place.
Dr. Richmond, this has been so helpful. I think opening up the eyes of pastors in the West, and then also highlighting what a small partnership with Compassion International does. It creates life-altering testimonies that don't just help one person, but that one person ends up helping thousands, nations, global influence around the world, all because some girl took some of her babysitting money and gave it to Compassion. And I'm grateful for the partnership with Compassion on this show, and I'm grateful for you. And what I would love for you to do is, would you mind saying a prayer for the pastors here in the West that are listening? Obviously, anyone can get access to the show, but our audience is mostly, church pastors, church planters, church leaders in America. Would you mind just saying a prayer of blessing over them, that their eyes might be open to the things of the world globally, so that they can contribute and help? And again, we're very grateful for your input and sacrifice. And again, your leadership, it's changing lives, and my heart has been open today. So thank you very, very much. Would you mind praying for us before we close?
Thank you, Mike. Father, thank you so much for everyone who's listening. We are reminded of what this 15-year-old girl did for me. She chose to live simply so I could simply live. I thank you for such a life. This life in my mind joins the long line of saints who gave their life for the sake of the gospel, who chose to live with less so that you could be glorified, who chose to live with less so that others can live with more. And Father, I thank you for Heather. I pray for many more who are going to consider how blessed they are and decide, yes, it is true that to whom much is given, much is required in this hurting world. I pray for everyone who will sponsor a child. Bless them. Show them what that means to you. I also pray for pastors who are connected to this program, those who are listening. I pray, Father, that you bless them. I pray, Lord, that you use them. I pray, Lord, that they will prosper in their purpose. I pray that they will find their place in this ever-changing world and do the work as they hold their torch in the place you have planted them. I pray, Father, that they will consider what other pastors around the world are dealing with and find ways to engage so that they could lighten the load of some of the pastors who are serving in the islands and the mountains and some of the most difficult places. Thank you, Father, because you have us connected. We are one body, and we rejoice over that fact. We are one in you. And so, Father, thank you once again for Mike and this opportunity that I have to share your story, what you are doing in this part of the world. To you be the glory. Amen.
Amen. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Richmond, and thank you for your influence. Thank you to Compassion International for being a sponsor of the show, and we'll be back with you shortly. Thanks again for tuning in.
I know digital marketing is hard, and let's be honest, you're not great at it. Just because your youth pastor is young doesn't mean he should do it either. Trust the guys over at therocket.media to help you grow your church. They can help you get more first-time guests each week with Google ads and market your big holidays like Christmas and this upcoming Easter on Facebook and Instagram. They have invited over 25 million people to church using Google ads alone. They just helped us launch our third campus with over 400 people on launch Sunday. So why don't you set up a free consultation right now at therocket.media/church. That's therocket.media/church. When you mention us, just as a thank you for signing up, you'll get some free AirPods. That's therocket.media/church. Hey, I'd like to highlight a ministry that I've loved for a long time, Compassion International. Compassion is an incredible organization that is all about releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. They currently serve over 2 million children and their families in some of the most poverty-stricken areas in the world. And here's my favorite part. All of this is happening in local churches. Compassion is all about equipping the local church so that every single child is cared for by leaders in their community. Now, as a pastor, I have found Compassion to be a strategic part of our global missions strategy. And as a church, we've incorporated Compassion into all of our missions work, especially in Guatemala. Compassion made it easy for everyone in our church to put their faith in action by caring for a child in need. I would encourage any pastor listening to learn more about Compassion. You can help equip local churches around the world while seeing your church grow in the process. Visit compassion.com/Mike to learn more. That's compassion.com/Mike to learn more. I hope today's episode really helped you in the areas of your life when it comes to leadership and compassion. Man, Richmond's story is so powerful and tangible. Do us a favor, if you are watching on YouTube, hit that like button and comment below what you loved most about today's episode. Also, if you're listening, feel free to leave us a 5-star review on whichever platform you're listening on today. The Mike Santiago Show is produced by John Michael Sherman of the Rocket Media LLC, and you can find and follow our show at MikeSantiagoShow.com. Again, thanks for listening to today's episode of the Mike Santiago Show, presented by Compassion International.